Hello and welcome to Faux News. I'm your host, Bo Hughes. What is all the hubbub about Greenland? Greenland is the world's largest island. It is bigger than the U.S. state of Alaska by about a third. It is believed to have the world's second largest deposit of rare earths after China. It has significant oil and natural gas reserves, as well as copper, gold, silver, iron ore, etc. Its location in the Arctic is incredibly strategic. As the ice caps recede, the northern shipping route going through the Arctic and bypassing the Suez Canal to get from Europe to Asia or from Asia to North America is going to become increasingly used. We have already seen this. This area, for that same reason, the recession of the ice caps, is also going to become increasingly available to military vessels, making the entire Arctic region vulnerable to expansionist, aggressive maneuvers similar to Russia just moving into Ukraine in February of 2022. All of these things are on the Trump administration's mind. I also personally believe that perhaps the biggest reason for the push for Greenland is the Golden Dome, which is this, similar to Israel's Iron Dome, this sort of protective shield the Trump administration wants to develop to protect America from any incoming missile attack. And I think that this is being left out of the public discourse because they don't want to give any cards away in terms of the development of the Golden Dome and what it may require. But I suspect that they have determined Greenland would need a lot of physical on-ground infrastructure put in place, satellite on ground stations put in place to make the Golden Dome feasible. And perhaps they view Greenland as being necessary for this because the islands up in the Arctic that are Canadian, they don't see as a viable option because obviously that's Canada. So Greenland is the next best alternative, and they see it as up for the taking, given that it's 1,500 miles away from this tiny little country that it says it belongs to. On that note, Greenland has been part of Denmark for 300 years. In 2009, it was granted self-rule, which means that it can leave Greenland at any point of its own accord. And that is a very interesting detail here, because I am fully on board with the Trump administration. I think they're correct in they're not overestimating the importance of Greenland. I also think that the reason why they're so uneasy about Greenland and leaving it in the hands of Europe and NATO is because they believe Europe has lost its mind. They are on the wokemotive. That's what I call it. Some people call it the woketariat, whatever. They have ideologically lost their minds, and they cannot be trusted really to protect the island or safeguard international security because they're just so far off the deep end ideologically that they can't combat a China effectively or a Russia, etc. And I 100% agree with that. Likewise, even taking out some of the madness of their politics out of the equation, I think we have some empirical evidence for the impotency of NATO and its penchant for a lot of big, bold talk, but never really following through in Ukraine over the last 4 years. They have been decrying Putin as basically the devil himself and, stressing the importance of this completely unequivocal support for Ukraine for 4 years, and yet they have yet to put NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. They just keep funneling money to Ukraine and have here you go, Ukraine, you do the work yourselves. I think the fact that that's how they're handling the Ukraine war, which is right on their doorstep on the European continent, I think is very representative of how they would approach any sort of encroachment or aggression that took place towards Greenland, and that it would be, for obvious reasons, far more that way, this hands-off, we're not willing to put any skin in the game type of approach with it for something to occur on Greenland because it's not part of the European landmass. It's 1,500 miles away from Denmark, and therefore obviously not viewed by Europe nearly as much of a security threat. So, in my mind, the most troubling aspect of Greenland is China. Russia, I think most people agree, is pretty tied up in Ukraine for right now, and at least for the time being, as long as that's going on. China would be the biggest adversary that you would have to be concerned about perhaps doing something in Greenland, taking part of Greenland. And if that were to happen, I really don't know how you would get them off of there, because then you're talking about Arctic warfare, which we've seen this, again, going back to Ukraine. When you fight in these tough environments like these mud-filled fields in Ukraine, it's really hard to make any sort of advances or repel an invader because the environment is just so not conducive to fighting and making large movements. So if someone does a surprise attack, they have the upper hand because once they gain that ground, it's very hard to get them to repel them and push them back and reclaim that land. So I know all these things are playing into the Trump administration's thinking on this, and I agree with it. I don't trust Europe at all. Their politics has gone so far to the left overall. They've lost their minds. I mean, the lack of free speech over there, Vance and others have talked about this, is alarming, doesn't even do it justice. And it's interesting. I think people just have trouble with change a lot of times, and they just can't think outside the box. I want to know, why is NATO such a great alliance? Like, what do we actually get from NATO? I mean, even in Ukraine, we're still footing the lion's share of the bill. I don't know what the numbers are. I should have looked them up before I did this podcast, but I wouldn't be surprised if, since Russia invaded Ukraine, the U.S. has given probably 60 to 70% of the monetary value of munitions to Ukraine. We've given 60 to 70%, and Europe, who it's their backyard, has only given the remaining 20 to 30%. Why is NATO considered this great ally? I'm well aware that they helped us out in Afghanistan to a large extent. In fact, Denmark had one of the highest per capita casualty rates in Afghanistan. It was a NATO-led mission. It was a collaborative, multi-nation mission. I'm aware of that, but I think a lot of things, quite frankly, have changed over the last 10 to 15, 20 years. In fact, I think the war on terror kind of did a lot, well, particularly our invasion of Iraq, really did a lot to turn public sentiment in Europe into this sort of un-American sentiment. And I just think the dynamics of things have really changed. I don't think NATO can really be trusted, and I don't think that we really get much out of the relationship. And you see that really with these talks. They just have this sort of, it's kind of just like this ego power war that's going on right now. They just unequivocally say Greenland's part of Denmark, period. Despite the fact that we foot the lion's share of the bill for everything, that, you know, we're always supposed to pick up the tab when they need help, but yet they won't try to be diplomatic and reach a compromise with this on Greenland. They just think they're going to dictate to us how everything's going to be. I mean, you don't get a free lunch in this world. Why should we always be the ones to pick up the tab in Ukraine or other places and then when we come forward with something of our desires, aka we want Greenland, there's no sort of attempt to meet us halfway in the middle there to try and flesh things out. My biggest concern with Europe, I think, and I attribute this to their woke politics, is these people on the left, they like China, or at least they don't want to or are incapable of fully grasping the threat of China, and that just goes to their love of socialism, I think. I think a lot of it also has to go with white guilt that's indicative of their just insane ideology. Because they have no problem, demonizing Russia and Putin because they're viewed as this white country. But China, they won't say anything bad about usually because, they suffer from white guilt. No, we can't say anything bad about the Chinese despite the fact they have like 1 million Muslims and like labor work camps in the western part of the country or an endless list of human rights abuses or whatever else. You never hear anything about that. These left-leaning governments in the West, which is what Europe primarily is, just has this quasi-love affair with China. They can't be trusted at all on the China part of the ledger, in my opinion, and I think Trump holds the same opinion. So you combine all these things together, and I 100% support the idea of us acquiring Greenland. Now let's talk about how would you go about doing that. Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of different options on the table, really. The population of Greenland is 56,000 people. 56,000 people. That's like a medium-sized town in the U.S. And again, they have self-rule. They were granted that in 2009. So all you have to do is get the government of Greenland to sign off on joining the United States, and it's done. Denmark can't do anything about it. They can wage protests in the streets in Copenhagen, but they can't do anything about it. I think I would not be surprised if this is what ends up playing out, but I think the most common sense way about doing this is to simply pay the people of Greenland off. We have the resources. They're talking about a $1.5 trillion defense bill for 2027. $1.5 trillion. No doubt a large part of that 50% increase is because that's what it would take to install the Golden Dome, which is a massive undertaking. No one even knows if it's actually possible or not. But so 56,000 people, you could conceivably pay each one of those people $1 million, and it would be a drop in the bucket. It wouldn't even be a fraction probably of the fraud that's in the billions and billions of dollars that has occurred in Minnesota itself. So we have the money to do something like that. And my opinion is I think that's what we should do. 56,000 people, $1 million. I find it very hard to believe that you would not get them to take that $1 million if they really found out that, yes, here's the check. It's right here. We're not faking you out. It's real. If you give us Greenland, here's $1 million. I find it hard to believe that the overriding majority of the population in Greenland would not just say, okay, yeah, we'll be part of the U.S. for that check. And then, no hostilities, no open conflict with NATO, whatever. I think that's the best option that's on the table. That's one that shout out to Nick Shirley. He was on the ground in Greenland doing some interviews recently, and he was asking some of these citizens, random people he met on the street, some questions along those lines, although he was talking much smaller numbers, like 100,000, I think, per person was the largest number he threw out there. And admittedly, I hadn't even thought about that way of going about doing things till I saw that video, and immediately a light bulb went off, and I was like, oh yeah, with such a small population, that's the no-brainer thing to do way to go about doing this. Another thing about Greenland is that, and again, this goes back to woke politics. They're just an extension of Denmark in many respects. And with these woke politics, I call it environgelicalism, just the madness of these environmentalists. I love the outdoors. I'm all for, common sense and environmental protection measures. These people have turned it into a religion. They've lost their minds to the point you can't do any sort of development, infrastructure projects, nothing, because there's so much red tape, or they've just completely outlawed things. And on that note, in 2021, Greenland passed some environmental legislation that, for all intents and purposes, completely outlawed rare earth mining, because it outlawed the extraction of uranium. And when you go in and mine rare earths, you're inevitably extracting uranium because it's coupled into the mineral deposits that is also with the rare earth elements. So they really caused basically a cessation to all mining in Greenland. They've just totally shut the island down from an economic standpoint and the ability for companies to go in there and extract natural resources. And I just owe that to these woke politics and just going off the deep end with all these environmental measures. So we'll see how this plays out. I really hope that this idea will get floated out there about just paying Greenland large checks so that this can be acquired with the least amount of turmoil and hopefully not open conflict. I do think that the U.S. should have Greenland. I don't think Europe, and Canada is really just part of Europe anymore at this point. None of them can be trusted, especially on the China front, in my opinion. And again, it is a huge threat and problem, the prospect of, if China were to do something like Russia did in Ukraine in 2022, they do a surprise attack and they just move in and take a bunch of Greenland. The environment is so harsh, being able to repel them and remove them off the island would be a massive undertaking that who knows if it would even be possible. And then you have probably World War III, a big time problem on your hands. So that's all for today. We'll see how the deliberations go. This constant checkmate going on between Trump and Europe is interesting to watch, and we'll keep tabs on it. I hope he doesn't go down this tariff route very much any further. One interesting thing here that's on the table with this economic warfare is there's a Dutch company called ASML, and they're involved in what's called lithography. I think that's how you pronounce it, which is, it's involved in the production of all these very advanced chips. So they do a lot of work for NVIDIA, for instance, and they are crucial to NVIDIA's advanced chips. I suspect that could very well be a card that is used by Europe. They're based in the Netherlands, ASML is. That could be a card that's used down the road to combat the Trump administration and just say, hey, you know, NVIDIA is going to not get this tech anymore. We're not going to continue to work on their chips and help them develop them if you push this Greenland thing any further. That's something to keep an eye on. I will do that. But I hope Trump doesn't go down this tariff route any further. I don't think that's the way to go about doing it. For one thing, I think Europe will not give playing the tariff card. I think we'll just continue to punch each other in the face back and forth economically doing that, and no one side is going to concede. I think something along these lines of massive payments directly to the citizens of Greenland is the way to go. And I hope that starts getting talked about in the public sphere, and that is the way it's done. So we'll keep tabs on everything. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw today, if you could subscribe to the channel, please, that would greatly help things out. And we'll see you next time. As always, it's not fake news, it's faux news.